of what we discussed like yesterday, and then we can proceed if there are no questions. So yeah, first we just saw what SDOC basically is. Then we discussed the uh, like the complete pipeline. Like we discussed the overview of the complete pipeline. The first is the model training part, which this part we discussed in detail. So first we defined our task specification and hardware cost, which was basically that we need to predict the handwritten digits with an accuracy of greater than 97%. That was our task. And then we identified our data set, which was MNIST. Then we decided our network, which was VNet 5. And we discussed this network in like reasonable detail. We discussed about the how to calculate the learnable parameters, and how to like how basically each of these operations work, and given an input, how we can calculate the output of each of the intermediate layers and the total outputs. And we also saw how to calculate the total number of learnable parameters, which is quite important when it comes to the FPGA deployment. So we discussed this LeanIt in quite a bit of detail. And then yeah, this 44426 was the total number of parameters that we got. Then we just discussed about like which functions we should move, which operations we should move to the PL, and which operations we should keep on the PS. Then we came to the data set, and after discussing the data set, yeah, we then went to the Google Colab to discuss the training, right? And here we just we discussed the overall code. I mean, if you want to train any kind of deep learning network, so this is the rough flow which will be followed. I mean, the things will be replaced will be just here. Instead of loading the MNIST, you can load your own data set. Then here, instead of creating LeanIt, you can create your own architecture. And then I think the training pipeline remains essentially the same. You can change your entropy, you can change your optimizer and your criterion as per your needs. And basically this is a train loop. I mean, in a brief, it just takes the inputs, sends it to the GPU, calculates the predictions, then calculate the loss with the ground truth, and then propagates the loss backwards. So that is essentially the training step. And then in the test step, I mean, for each test value, we just send it to the GPU, then we calculate the loss, and we propagate. Then we propagate, no, sorry, we don't propagate the loss because it's the test. We just calculate the loss, and then we just calculate the accuracy. So we discussed each of these functions in detail the last time. So if you have any doubt, you can ask. But yeah, I'm just going through the brief. Then here we just train the model. So essentially, for for your own case, in case you need to train your own model, these parts will not be changing a lot. I mean, the main part will be the model and the data set. Then we trained it for around 15 epochs. We achieved kind of a accuracy of yeah, we just see something around 97.87. Then yeah, this was just loading. This was just loading the Google Drive to save our model. Then we saved our model to this path, and then we saved also the data set and the test data set and the test labels, because we will use these same test data sets and labels to test our hardware implementation. Then yeah, then we extracted the weights of the model. So extracting the weights, yeah, so we defined each of the weights. So I've just converted, it was not a function yesterday, I just converted that into a function so that I can call it whenever I want. So if you give it the model, it will just extract the weights of convolution 1, bias of convolution 1, weights of convolution 2, bias of con 2, and weight and bias of each layer. And then it just flattens it and writes it into a file. So yesterday when we ended this, I think we had yeah, we didn't have this. Okay, yeah. So yesterday when we ended this, we had these three files, right? So the first file was the test data, next was the test label, and third was the weights file. So these are the three files which we need to deploy our model on the FPGA. So this was what we discussed up till yesterday. So if there is any doubt, you can ask. Otherwise, we will just continue.
So, hi. Actually, the models and weights that we obtained, right? The script is based on PyTorch,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
TensorFlow Lite as well as Keras.
I mean, so are you asking whether those will work or not?
Yeah, so similar weight extractions and these calculations, right? So my understanding is the Keras APIs are very much different and much more lighter as compared to this, right? So would the flow when we try to use the TensorFlow Lite,
Uh-huh.
Keras is similar or
So if you use, I know about Keras and I know a bit about MATLAB also, but yeah, so if you use Keras, then the flow, overall flow is exactly the same. What will differ is basically your training function will be a bit different because that will be according to the Keras syntax, but that will be the standard training function. Then your model declaration will differ, but the number of weights will be the same. But what will differ is your dimension of these weights. So in Keras, what could happen is, like here in PyTorch, let's say this is the weight, this is a shape of the weights of the convolution one layer. So this is of the dimension 6 comma 1 comma 5 comma 5 because you have 6 filters and each filter is 1 cross 5 cross 5. So in PyTorch, it is a uh, channels first order. I mean, this is a channel, right? So in PyTorch, the channel is written first. But in Keras, as far as I remember, the channel is written last. So the shape of the weights and biases will differ. It will most probably differ between different frameworks. So you need to ensure that the weights, you know exactly in which order the weights are being written into the file. That is the most important aspect.
okay?
So if
So
the yeah
we need to take care, irrespective of the way it stores. We need to uh, do this order somewhere when we try to deploy it on the hardware, or it will be automatically taken care. Like
so
even yeah. Sorry, sorry. Go on. Rohit.
yeah. So what I'm saying is the hardware will not automatically take care of anything because you will have to code the hardware. So you will have
Okay.
to. So in this case, I decided to store my weights and biases like this, right? I decided to store
Okay.
wcon1 first, bcon1 first, wcon2 second. Then I flattened each of them and wrote them. This is because I know that on the hardware I will be reading them like this. I will be
Got
reading
it.
first
Okay.
wcon1. So it's up to you, but you should be consistent on the software and the hardware, because otherwise what will happen is you will think that your weights are being correctly loaded, but your hardware model will not give correct predictions because it is reading it the wrong way.
Right. Okay. Got it. So one other thing is like here it looks more straightforward to get the weights and biases
Uh-huh.
because of the load model APIs what we have here. But
Mhm.
in TensorFlow, in Keras, we have more based on a flat buffer file structure, right? So do we have a similar way to extract it and we kind of result in this weights and bias like this way?
Yes, yes. In Keras, I think there is a simple, you can do model dot weights and then it will give you a list of all the weights. So it's in fact much simpler than this. You don't have to do this dot CPU dot detach or anything. It will just,
Okay.
you just have to do, I think model dot weight, and then it will give you a list. And then each index of this list will be each of, so first index will be WC1, second index will be BC1, WC2, BC2. But again, you will have to see whether, you will have to check the dimensions, and you will have to make sure that the order is matching, because like technically your same hardware code should be able to take the weights of both PyTorch and Keras. So
Right.
to do that, you will have to ensure that when you write this, your PyTorch, the order in which the PyTorch weights are written and the order in which the Keras weights are written are consistent.
Got it. Got it.
But
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's clear, Rohit. Yeah,
Mhm.
sure.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you.
okay. So any other doubt?
Yeah,
Okay.
so in the convolution layer,
Mhm.
so what are the weights
Here,
there? Yeah, in the convolution layer. So in the fully connected layer, I can understand the weights.
Okay, so I'll just show you.
Yeah, could you go over that quickly?
Mhm. 1 second. So can you see this?
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah, so this is like a representation. It's like a graphic of how the convolution is working. So this example, it has two filters, W0 and W1, right? And the input has 3 channels. And since the input has 3 channels, your filter has 3 dimensions. So this was what we discussed. So the weights of the filter are these values, the kernel values, right? This 101, 101, the things which are dot producted with the input, right? These are the weights. These are the learnable parameters. So,
Okay.
depending on the loss which you get, the model will adjust these values such that the loss is minimum. So this,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, so that is why once you fix the kernel size and you fix the basically channels of the input, then your then even if you vary the x and y size along the of the input, the weights of the convolution layer won't change. So this was what we discussed, like the convolution layer is independent of the size of the input. But yeah, these are the learnable parameters. Okay, so we'll just go a bit ahead. Yeah, so this was Linux 5. We have discussed this. Now, yeah, now we will start to code in C++ using HLS and the SDSOC flow. So like I won't spend much time in this, but this because I think this has been discussed. So this is an example of a 7 series heterogeneous SOC. So it has it has like dual Cortex A9 cores, which is the PS part, and then it has an FPGA part, which is the 7 series PL. So yeah, this I think you must be already familiar about. So the board we will be using will be ZC706, which will be which has the same architecture as this. So we'll be using the PL for our accelerator. For our case, we will see what you want to accelerate, and the remaining functions will be deployed on the PS. Now, yeah, this is just the rough architecture of this, like the very top view architecture of the FPGA. So the basic unit is the CLB. CLB has a multiplexer and LUTs. CLB has multiplexer and LUTs, and multiple of these CLBs can be connected to each other through programmable interconnects. So, and you have some IO blocks, and these orange things are the block RAMs. So block RAMs are the on-chip memory of the FPGA. So if you want to compute, so yeah, it's basically an on-chip memory. If you want to have fast accesses, you can load your data to the on-chip first and then use it anywhere else. And then these are DSP units. So DSP units are used to do multiplication and addition, MAC operations. So these are specific units designed to do this, and floating point arithmetic. So if you want to do any floating point arithmetic, it will be using the DSPs. So for our ZC706, we have yeah, so this is 18 KB block RAM. So this is 18 kilobits. So it has 1090 18 KB block RAMs. So, and this, it has 900 DSPs, and it has some 437K LUTs and 218K flip-flops. So why am I telling you this thing about the ZC706? That's because this number of block RAM is important with respect to our model, because if we try to calculate, 1 second, I'll just open a calculator. So if we try to calculate the absolute amount of space on the block RAM, right? So what could it be, like from the values that I've given? So what could be the total space on the block RAM? I mean, you have 1090 block RAM, and block RAM is 18 kilobits. So you can just answer in the chat, or even unmute and say. Uh, 1090 into 18, right? Instead of 80. Yeah. So this the hardware manufacturers, they use 1000 for kilo. So they don't use 1024, but yeah, that's okay. So 1090 into, like, let's say 1000 for a kilo, and into 18, right? So this is the amount of space in bits. So this is in bits, kilobits, not kilobytes. So sorry, it's into and into. Okay. So this is the amount of space in bits which is available, right? Now we need to see. So we plan to move the convolution layer on the hardware. Okay. So I discussed before that all three of the layers can be parallelized. So you can parallelize the max pooling. You can also parallelize the fully connected, and also you can also parallelize the convolution. But for this case, we'll be parallelizing the convolution layer, but the ideologies can be applied to both of these layers, and you can decide by hardware software co-design which in the final design which layer you want to parallelize. So if we go to the convolution layer, we want to see whether the largest convolution layer will completely fit our block RAM or not, right? We need to load the weights and the biases onto the block RAM to process the convolution. So for that, we need to see whether the largest convolution layer, all its weights and biases, can fit inside our model. So the largest is like 2416 weights, right? So at each of these weights, we'll be using floating point, 32-bit floating point to represent these weights. So the space like occupied by these weights would be like 2416 into 32, right? 32 bits. So it's around 77312. So you can see it's much smaller than this. So that's because this ZC706 is a relatively bigger board. But for smaller board, you may find that computing this will be helpful. Otherwise, you may run into errors at the time of FPGA deployment. So this is a just quick check. It's a very approximate check. It's not like all of these block RAMs will be fully occupied after the synthesis time, but it's a good check to get an idea about whether how big or how small your model is with respect to the hardware you have. So I hope this step is clear. I mean, it's quite hard to estimate the LUTs, flip-flops, and the DSP of your model without doing any code. But yeah, the amount of block RAM, I mean, it can be kind of, you can get a rough idea about what it will be. Yes, if there are any questions, please ask, because these are all important steps, because these are hardware deployment specific steps. So if there is any doubts, then you should ask them. So okay. So
this block RAM, is it similar to the L1 cache, or that comparison won't be valid?
Yeah, the function is similar. As in, the function is similar. I mean, the benefit of these are distributed across the board, right? That is because if any of the CLB wants them, then there should be a block RAM near that CLB. So the block RAM is used for basically very fast memory accesses. This is the fastest memory you have. So if you take all your weights and biases from the DDR memory every time, then that will induce significant latencies. But if you load from the block RAM, it gives you very small latencies. The function is similar. But
sure.
But you have to explicitly load. There is no in the cache. There is a cache controller, right, which fetches things into the cache. But there is no block RAM controller. You have to explicitly load things into the block RAM.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So now we have kind of a brief idea about about our board. Now let's get back. Yeah. So first we read input. So this will be the overall how our hardware will also look. First read input, then perform convolution. The weights from the convolution will be read from the DDR, then max pool, then convolution, then this convolution also has weights. Then you have another max pool, then you have a fully connected layer which also has its weights. Then you have another fully connected layer with weights, another fully connected layer with weights, finally the output. So yeah, so these colors represent like what we intend to do. So as we discussed before, conv, maxpool, and fc all can be moved to hardware, but for this case we'll be discussing the mapping of convolution. So this convolution will be moving to the PL. The weights are in the DDR, and we will be loading them onto the on chip. So I mean, can someone tell me why? I mean, I think I've already kind of explained this, but I think knowing that is important. I mean, why are we using the block RAM? Because we will have to spend the time to load the things into the block RAM. I mean, so if there is no good reason to do that, we shouldn't do it. So like there are a couple of benefits. So if you can, if someone can just tell me like what those benefits could be.
Yeah, as you said, it's mainly the latency.
Yeah, so the first is the latency. Okay, so if you read from the since these convolutions, they may have some repeat weights, right? Because you are basically dot producting with the kernel and you're shifting it 1 pixel, so there will be some repeat of the weights you use and the input you use. So to repeatedly do it from the DDR is not wise, right? So that is one benefit. What could be another benefit?
Maybe.
Yeah. Hello, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, someone was talking and I
Yeah.
also pitched in. So maybe what I was trying to add here is like we are trying to use the localized resources. Apart from the fetching and latencies, we are trying to use the resources efficiently, and also trying to map it with each of the layers basically from the design. From the convolution, the corresponding weights are mapped into the corresponding kind of layering is what we are following even in the mapping, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but that is kind of the first benefit, right? We are using localized resources, so that will have a latency benefit, because every time I read, I will be reading the weights from the block RAM instead of the DDR. So that is the latency benefit, no?
Correct. That's right. Apart from it, we are trying to use the onboard resources efficiently. Apart from latency, if we don't use it right, there won't be a purpose of having them or requiring them.
Yeah, but if like just like the block RAM is there, like I'm asking that exact question. Why is there a block RAM there? I mean, first reason is the latency, right? I mean, why the first reason is the late. So you are answering like if there is a block RAM in the chip, why shouldn't we use it? So that is my question. Like, why is there a block RAM on the chip? I mean, the second benefit could be that when you read from the DDR, right, you read it in burst. So if let's say I don't have a block RAM and I read single values in DDR, then that will have a very high latency impact if I load 1-2 values in the DDR. But let's say I'm loading all the values from the DDR to get into the block RAM first. Then I can do that in bursts. In bursts, I mean, multiple packets can be sent at the same time. So in that case, my latency can be amortized by the amount of packets I'm sending. So when first we load things from the DDR to the block RAM, that latency will be much lesser than if I am loading from the DDR when I'm computing the value outputs, because then I will have to load it one by one. So I hope the second part is obviously that reading from the block RAM multiple times is much more cheaper than loading from the DDR. Plus the localization thing, if you are computing on the FPGA, if you are only using the amount of resources the FPGA has, then we will not be, keeping the DDR busy per se. I mean, the DDR can be used for other activities while the accelerator is computing its work. So I hope the benefits of loading the weights and biases from the DDR to the block RAM is kind of clear, because that is what we will be doing through code also. So now, yeah, so these are just the dimensions. This I think we will be very familiar with by this point. 28, 28, 1. It becomes 24 cross 24 cross 6 because there are 6 filters. Then 12 cross 12 cross 6. Then 8 cross 8 cross 16 because there are 16 filters here. Then 4 cross 4 cross 16, and then it gets flattened here, and then into 120, then 184, then 10. So I think we are very familiar with this by now. Now, okay, now let us do the FPGA code for our model. So before going into the SDSOC, we'll first discuss the code about what will be the code, and then we will see, then we will check the correctness of the code through our simple GCC compiler, and then we will go on to the SDSOC. So is this visible? Is my the VS Code window visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So please make the background a light color.
Background light
black,
color.
so change the background.
I don't think I know how to do it.
Otherwise, increase the font size. That's
Yeah, I think I can make it light first, and then I will increase. Yeah. So is it visible? I think the dark was more visible, but is it visible now?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, that's fine. So, so we will first start with the model declaration. So we try to keep the hardware code as similar to that of the framework code as we can, because that will make, replicating this for multiple networks easier, and it will also, streamline the way we are coding. So first, okay, we will talk about these variables a bit later. So first, let's define our model. Okay, so this we can define our model. Yeah, so there are 3 types of layers in our model. One is the conv layer, one is the max pool layer, one is the fully connected layer. So now here is one of the features which we are following, which is not really common. We are actually coding for the PS and the PL part as if they are we are not making any distinctions in terms of the workflow. I mean, we are only implementing the conv layer on the PL, but as you will see further, and as you can see here also, we are kind of declaring everything together. I mean, we are declaring the conv layer, and we'll also declare the max pool layer, we'll also declare the FC layer, all in the same project. Yeah. So is there any question? Okay, so we'll be basically working as if everything is a unified project. We will not at this point we will not focus on which functions will go to the PS, which function will go to the PL, but while coding, while code, all of the software as well as the hardware function, they will be in the in kind of the same project. So yeah, so let's get started. So first we want to declare all the layers in our network. So this is the format of declaring the layer. So if it's a conv layer, we write 0. That's just an identifier that this is a conv layer. Then we write the number of input channels. Then we write the number of output channels. Output channels is basically the number of filters of the convolution. Then we write the size of the input, then the size of the output, and then we write the filter size. So, and for the max pooling layer, we write the identifier 1, then we write the number of input channels, number of output channels, size of input, size of output, and filter size. And in the fully connected layer, basically we just need the size of input, size of output, and whether it's a whether it's a ReLU or not, depending on your whether you want the activation or not. And then these are just space fillers. So yeah, so this is the way we will declare our layers. So if I just okay, so how to do it? 1 second, I will just open the architecture diagram once. Right here. Okay. Right. Now, I hope it's kind of visible, but okay, we will just remember what it was. Okay, so we'll just remember the layout for now. So the first layer of conv was you had zero, you had the identifier 0 because it's a conv layer. Then you had one input channel because it was a 28 cross 28 cross 1, right? It was a 28 cross 1 input. It has one channel, and it has the number of filters was 6, so that is the 6 here, which is the number of output channels. Then the input size was 28. So in this case, since I know my images are square, I'm only taking the input. But in case you have a rectangular image, then you can define like rows of input and columns of input, something like that. Then the number of outputs are 24, and then the number of I mean, this is the filter size, which is k cross k, which is 5 cross 5, right? So this is the filter size. Now, can you tell me what will be the similar layout for the max pooling layer?
First two will be 1 and 6.
1, right? The number of input channels will be 6, right? Output channels?
6.
6, right? Because max pooling does not have any impact on the number of output channels. So output channel will also be 6. The size of the input?
24.
24. Size of the output?
12.
12. And the filter size?
2.
2, right? Because we have a 2 cross 2 filter. Now, if we get to the third layer, which is your another convolution layer, what will be the layout of that? What will be the declaration of that layer?
0. 16.
16. Is the number of input channels 16?
No, it's 6.
6.
16 is the
16 is the output channels. Now, size of the input?
12.
12. And size of the output?
8.
8. And filter size?
5.
5. Great. So this is how your this thing will look. And now, what will be the next max pool layer declaration? It's a max pool, so it will be 1. Now the size of the input?
16. 16.
The number of input channels, that will be 16. Now number of output channels?
16.
16. And size of input?
8.
Size of input is 8. Size of output is
4.
4. And this thing is 2. Right. So similarly, like you can declare the fully connected layers also. So I have kind of declared it beforehand, just to make sure that you have the right values. So it is also exactly the same which we did, right? 1, 6, 6, 24, 12, 2, and 0, 6, 16, 12, 8, 5. So so now we have declared our model. Now, okay, now let's get to the main. So what is the main doing? In the main, this is some string processing thing. Now, yeah, in the main, what I'm doing is you're allocating your buffers for your input, your output, input buffer and your output buffer and your input file buffer and your weight buffer and each of your weights and biases. So this input buffer and the output buffer will store the inputs and outputs of your model, of each of your layer. And your weights, wconv1, bconv1, wconv2, bconv2, these are just the sizes, right? These are just pointers to store your weights and biases. So the sizes of this is why calculating the number of learnable parameters is important, right? Because you will be allocating only that much space for that weight. So for WCon1, you will be allocating 5 into 5 into 1 into 6, and that will be size of float. So float like 32 times this much, this many 32, this many bits you will be allocating for weight W_con1. For B_con1, you will be allocating 6 because there are only 6 biases for con layer and into size of a float. Similarly, for WCon2, BCon2, you'll be allocating only that much space as you computed in the learnable parameters. Now, in the W_FC1, there will be 256, which is the flattened version of the last max pool layer, cross 120. And in the B_FC1, there will be 120. And W_FC2, B_FC2, these are all similar. So I hope this declaration is clear. This weight buffer, this will store all of your weights. So this has a size of W_file_size, which I defined above. So this is the W file size, which is 44426, right? This is the number we have been seeing multiple times. This is the total size, total number of weights and biases of the entire model. So this will be the buffer into which, so what will follow is, we'll read from the file, the weight file that we stored from PyTorch. We'll read from that file into this weight buffer, and then from these weight buffer we will store them into these individual buffers like WCon1, BCon1, WCon2, BCon2, WFC1, BFC1, WFC2, BFC2, WFC3, BFC3. And this input buffer, output buffer will store your input file buffer will store your input file. So this input file image has a size of 28 cross 28 cross 1. So this input file image buffer will be of input file size. So we'll process we'll load one input at a time. So 28 cross 28 cross 1. And then you have input buffer, output buffer, and your weight buffer. So I hope this declaration is clear. So we'll be going step by step through what this main does, but yeah, each of these steps should be very clear about what is happening.
Just one question here on the input input file image, right? So we are just giving representation of the digits, and are they kind of already in the float format when we give it the input test vectors?
Yeah, so when we stored, right, when we stored those inputs when we stored those inputs in our file, when we did that, we wrote all our test data also, right? We wrote the test data and the test labels, right? So those labels we wrote, those were in 28 cross 28. Those will be grayscale values. So
yeah, so input file size is 2828 grayscale, right? Not file size, file image. Input file image is 2828 grayscale.
Yeah, it is 28 cross 28 cross 1. That's the size, but I am reading them as float. Technically, you can still read them as integers also. That is, if that's the point.
Okay.
But as you will see, we will use a common input and output buffer. So that's why reading them as float is a bit easier. Because even if you read them as 32-bit integers, it won't save much space, right?
Okay, yeah, but mainly I was concerned with the format of the float, because we need to take any special consideration or not. But the typecast will take the conversion here, I guess.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the IEEE single precision floating point. So this is a standard float you have, floating point 32, and any conversion that will be typecast. So basically, if there is a pixel with value 100, that will be read as 100.0.
Yeah. Makes sense. Thank you.
So you define these buffers first, right? Now you check for the memory allocation. So if any of your buffer is null, basically we're just checking to see if you don't fail to allocate, if you don't fail to do this malloc. Now you load the weights to the DDR memory, right? So your weights are located in this file, linet mnist weights.dat. So what I did was I already downloaded these linet mnist weights and the test label new and the test process new. These are the data and the weights, right? This was what we saved into our to our Google Drive, and this I downloaded here. So this is that weight file dot/linear template weights.dat. Then what we'll do is we'll read the entirety of this file into this weight buffer. So that is what is happening in this in.read. So this is just a syntax. So it will just read this file until size of float into W file size. So W file size is the entire size of the file. So it will read the entire file and put all the contents into this weight buffer. Now we'll be initializing the weight buffer for each layer. Now for the first layer, it is like you have 150 values for the weights, right? This 5 into 5 into 1 into 6. So you have 150 values. So you basically, and because I know the order in which I wrote the weights, I know that the first weights will be the w_con1, second will be b_con1, third will be w_con2, b_con2. So I'm reading them into this w_con1 buffers at the exact same order. So first I'm doing float of weight buffer of I. So this is just explicitly converting them into floating points, and this is weight buffer of I. That is, first 150 elements will be my w_con1. Then following 150, the next 6 elements will be my bias of conv1. Then the next 2400 elements will be the weights of conv2, which is this 5 into 5 into 6 into 16. Then the next 16 elements will be the bias of conv2. Then similarly, weights and biases of fully connected layer 1, then FC2, then FC3. So this is why it is much recommended that you manually store the weights yourself and not use some automated tool for storing the weights into the file, because that automated tool, you may not know how that is storing it, and then you may face problems in reading that file. So since I know the layout in which I stored the weights, so I can easily like just do this. The first 150 will be con1, con2, and similarly. So I hope this part is clear. Okay. So now we have loaded the weights into each of these buffers. And now the next part remaining is to load the input image to the DDR, right? Now what we'll do is we'll just open these files. The test process new.dat is basically your test images. These are the test images. And this test label new.dat are your test labels. Now the number of test cases are 10,000. So for each of those test cases, you get this like you get one basically one line of that file. So each line will be storing 784 values. So because when we were storing them in NumPy, you might remember that we stored them by converting them into 10,000, 784. So each line will store 784 values. So I'm reading one line and the corresponding label to get the first image. This is my first image. Now for the input file image size, which is 28 cross 28 cross 1, input buffer of I'm storing every pixel of the input to this input buffer. So I hope this part is clear. And another thing is that you should always try to parameterize this, parameterize the code as much as possible, because let's say tomorrow I have a 32 cross 32 image. I don't have to check my entire project to see wherever I use 28 cross 28 and change it to 32 cross 32. I just need to make this 32 cross 32 cross 1 instead of 28 cross 28 cross 1. So parameterization always helps. So first we load the entire image into the input buffer. So this is the first step. Then we just initialize the output buffer to 0 in case it has some garbage values. So all the so in case it has some garbage values, I'll initialize them into 0. Then I will perform the first convolution. So this perform conv is the function that I made for performing convolution. So this thing has the input buffer, the output buffer, w_con1, b of con1. Then this layer 01, 02, 03, 04, and 05 are the features of that convolution layer, which we declared here. So the layer 01 will be the number of input channels, number of output channels, size of input, size of output, and kernel size. So all of these are the inputs to the convolution layer, perform conv function, right? So the input buffer will have the input images, and the function will write the output to the output buffer, and it will use the w_con1, b_con1, and given the following parameters of the following features of that layer. Now, like I hope this API kind of is clear, like what is happening. Now in the perform, now that we'll perform the first max pool. So the max pool, instead of like copying the output buffer back into the input buffer and using the input buffer, I'm just doing that in a ping pong fashion kind of. I mean, you have an input, it will store in the output, and the output will be the input of the next one, and that will be stored in the and that output will be stored in the input. So for the perform max pool, the input will be the output buffer because that stores the output of the convolution. And since we don't need the values in the input buffer anymore, we can just overwrite the input buffer with the output of the max pool. And then the output of the max pool, which is stored in the input buffer, will be given as an input to the second convolution, and its output will be stored in the output buffer. So please let me know if there are any doubts in this part. So we're essentially using just 2 buffers to compute all our layers, so that we don't have to create like 7 buffers, because all of these buffers will be in the DDR and we don't want to use space that we don't have to. So input goes to output, then output goes and stores to input, and the input goes and then stores to output, then output stores to input. So in this way, each of these layers are working on the output of the previous layer. So is this clear?
So here we are not using the block RAM, is it? Block RAM.
No, that will. So right now, okay, let me just tell you this, that the main file, the main.cpp, whatever is in the main.cpp, is executed by the PS from the SDSOC perspective. So
okay.
From the SDSOC perspective, you have to define which functions you will implement on the PL and which functions you will implement on the PS. Now the main is almost always implemented by the PS. Then we will define that the perform conv has to be implemented on the PL, and remaining perform max pool and perform dense, which is the fully connected, these have to be performed on the PS. And inside the perform conv, we will do the block RAM part, because inside the function which is implemented on PL, only we can access the block RAM, right? Because block RAM is only available to the PL.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other doubts regarding this? Any other doubts? Okay. So now we have kind of called all our layers, and we have the final output in the output buffer, right? So now we need to read this output buffer. We need to read the first 10 values. So another thing is the size of this input and output buffer. Since we are using the common input and output buffer, we need to make the size such that the largest input and output largest inputs and outputs also fit in that. So that is why we here the output buffer size and the input buffer size, I've kept it like the output buffer size, I've kept it 24 cross 24 cross 16. Well, I think this is the maximum. It can even be lesser. I mean, this is not the most optimal allocation, but this is the most easier to understand. I mean, we are just keeping the output buffer size to be such that the largest output can fit, because we are using the common output and input buffers for the same for each of those for each of the layers. So we need to make sure that we allocate sufficient space, right? So this is why this is 28 cross 28 cross 16, and this is 24 cross 24 cross 16, the output and the input buffer sizes. So please ask any doubt if there is any, if you don't understand why or what is happening. So yeah, each of the layers, again, each of these layers take values from that model declaration which we had. So again, if you have another model architecture, then it will be very easy to, just change the values and have any other model running. Now I read the outputs. Now I want to calculate. Yeah. I mean, normally we don't like in the model, in the PyTorch model, we use softmax to calculate we use the softmax layer before calculating the maximum. But on hardware, normally we do the hardmax, which is just take the max, whatever is the maximum, because it will have the same trend, right? Softmax or hardmax, the trend will be the same. It will be just the absolute values will be different. So if for 10 values of the output, if the output is greater than max, then max equal to output. Basically, we are finding the maximum index of the output. That will be a prediction. Then we do predicted is output, expected is test label. If output is not test label, then we write that this is a mismatch, and then we increment the test case counter, and then we do everything again. This is our main. So I hope the main part is also clear. Now, okay, now let's get into the perform con. So this perform con will be the function that we'll implement on hardware. So let's discuss about this. So this is perform con. So what we do is, yeah, so this is the perform con function, right? It has input, output, it has the weight, it has the bias, it has M is the number of input channels. Okay, why? I think my screen just got blacked. Yeah, so I hope the screen is visible, right?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So we were in the perform con function basically, and so sorry for the interruption. I don't know what happened. Yeah, so this is the perform con function. So you have input, your output, your weight buffer, and your bias buffer, and you have number of input channels, output channels, your input size, output size, and your kernel, right? So each of these are arguments to the perform con function, and these are coming from the DDR memory. Like I'm just telling you from the SDSOC perspective what is happening. This input, output, weight, bias buffers, all of them are coming from the DDR memory, right? Now we define these local input buffers, local output buffers, local weight buffers, and local bias buffers. Now the memories that we allocate inside the hardware function, so the function which you implement on the FPGA, that's called a hardware function. So in our case, the perform conv is a hardware function. So when we all the memories that you allocate inside a hardware function, like you can allocate them in using the on-chip memory. So this local input buffer, local output buffer, local weight, and local bias, all these internal buffers, these will be your block RAMs. The reason for defining these buffers, I already explained the benefits of the block RAM. So we define them using the max, since all of the layers will be using the same buffer, and we need to specify the size of the buffer at compile time. We define the max M, max I, and max O and max N, which is the maximum number of input channels which is possible for any layer, maximum number of maximum size of input, maximum size of output, maximum output channels. So in the, I think this is in the function def.h. The function def.h, I've defined the max. So the maximum number of input channels input channel is 6, max of output channel is 16, the max size of input is 28, max size of output is 24, and the max of kernel is is 5. So I hope this declaration is clear. Then we do it in 4 steps. First, we load the input from the DDR to the local input buffer using this load input. Then we initialize the output buffers to 0 in case it has some garbage values. Then we load the weights into the local weight buffer, like from the DDR. Weights and biases, we load them together from the DDR to their own respective on-chip buffers. Then we perform the conv using the buffer. So in the conv, there is no DDR memory part here. Here, all the memory that you use will be from the BRAM. So you give it the local input buffer, local output buffer, local weight buffer, and local bias buffer, and you give it some other values for computation. Then you store the output from your local buffer into the DDR back. So this output is located in the DDR, right? So from the local output buffer, you will send the outputs back to the DDR. These are the steps that you have for the convolution. Now let's look at each of these steps. The first step is the load input. Now this load input, it has basically for each input channel, for each row of the input, for each column of the input, since this input buffer is a one-dimensional buffer, but my output buffer is, I made the output buffer 3-dimensional just so that it is easier to write the code. If it's that, since my convolutions will be on the output buffers and the weight buffers and the input buffers, I made them as 3-dimensional so that I can write the code more easily. But the DDR buffer, I've declared them as one dimensional because I used malloc to define that. So it's dynamically allocated. So it's just a pointer to that memory location. So I just get an equivalent one dimensional index for the 3-dimensional index. So for m, ri, ci, the one dimensional index will be ci plus ri into I, which is the number of rows, plus number of columns, plus m into I, which is the number of rows and columns. This basically says that in the one-dimensional buffer, first I will store all the columns. Like first line will have all the content of row 1. The next line will have row 2. Then once my entire 28 cross 28 is finished, then my next channel will start. So this I did because I know the layout of my input buffer, and I know the layout of my input, and and I know the layout in which I have written my input from the PyTorch to the input file. That is why knowing extracting the weights, you must be very careful about the dimensions. Otherwise, all of these things will give wrong answers. So basically, I just convert from a 3D index to an equivalent 1D index, and I just store the value of that 1D index to that 3D index. Basically, input buffer of m, ri, ci is input of 1D index. So this will just store each value from my DDR buffer to my block RAM buffer. Now the second part is the loading the weights. Now loading the weights, again, it's exactly the same thing for, yeah. Any doubt? Okay. So it's exactly the same thing. Okay, so it's exactly the same thing as that of your input. But one thing to notice is that whatever I have written, like in most cases, it is, I think, the optimal, but it may happen that these are suboptimal, but I have written it to improve the readability. So in this case, for example, you can do both the bias and the weights. You can load them in the same loop, but I've done it separately so that it's easier to read. So for every filter, you load the bias value of that filter into the bias buffer, and then for every since the weight is a 4-dimensional matrix, right? It has 6, 1, 5, 5. That was weight count 1. So for every filter, for every input channel, for every kernel, every row of kernel and every column of kernel, just convert the 4D index to a 1D index and then load the weight. This loads the weights from the DDR buffer to the on-chip buffer. And this is finally the output storing. So let's say my float output buffer has my convolution outputs. I want to store them back into the DDR buffer. So in that case, I'll just do the exact same thing. I'll just go loop over the output buffer size, and then for every value of the output buffer, I'll find the equivalent 1D index where it should be stored in the DDR buffer, and I'll store them. So this is the overall layout. Now the only function that's remaining is the conv. So please let me know if there is any doubt up till now. Okay, so now we look at the conv function. This conv will, let's look at the conv. Yeah. So the conv will take the input buffer, the output buffer, and weight buffer, bias buffer, and some values. This is the input size, output size, number of input channels, number of output channels, and kernel size. So this is your convolution. What is happening is, yeah, so this is basically the convolution operation for every output, for every output filter, for every input filter, for every row of the output. So the row of the output will be, since the output width is I minus k plus 1, which I kind of showed you by example, that R for every row in the output, R less than I minus k plus 1, which is the dimension of the output, R plus plus. For every column, since it's a symmetric, C less than I minus k plus 1, C plus plus. Then for every row of the kernel and for every column of the kernel, you do a dot product. Dot product is basically multiplication and addition of multiple values. So the weight will be NMRK, which is for that given filter, for that given input channel, and for that kernel row and column value, multiply that with the corresponding value of the input. So this input will start. So this at the beginning, your input will start from the top corner of the image, right? So at the beginning, R and C will be 0, and RK and CK will be 0. That means it will be the first pixel of the image. then it will go to the right as Rk and Ck increases. It will first go to the right because Ck is the inner loop. It will go to the right, then it will go down, which is because Rk is the outer loop. And then it will multiply with the corresponding weight, and it will add that to that corresponding output. This is the convolution. So once you understand the operation level of each of these layers, then it is relatively simpler to code. I mean, it's just coding at an operation level. Then, so I hope this is clear. Then we add the bias. Again, this is not the most optimal, but this is the most readable way. You can add the bias in the same thing as well. But yeah, adding the bias for every output filter, for every row of the output, and for every column of the output, just add the bias once. I am adding the bias at the end. You can add it at the beginning also. So this is the convolution function. Please let me know if there is any doubts in this. Okay. So this was the main part. So if there is any doubts, then it should be here, because after this, we are almost 90% done. So this will be our hardware function, perform con, and this will execute these three other functions internally. First, we are storing everything into the block RAM. Then we are reading from the block RAM to perform the convolution. Then we are storing the output of the convolution. Okay, if there are no doubts, then I will just go to the function.
I just have a basic, maybe trivial doubt. Like, how are we saying that as a block RAM? Like, are we allocating some kind of mapper file or?
No, like this thing is automatically handled by the SDSOC. So this is in the SDSOC flow. Like if you declare memories, it will try to do it on chip. If it's not possible because there is no sufficient block RAM, then it will give you some errors. But yeah, if you declare some memory inside the hardware function, the SDSOC takes care of it and does it on chip.
Okay, and how are we specifying perform con as a hardware function?
So we will see that
anyway,
when we come to the SDSOC project.
Got it. Okay.
Right. So now, yeah. So right now, just keep this in mind that we can define which functions we execute on PL and which functions we execute on PS. Now we have defined that is perform con will be executed on PL. How to specify that all we can see. But for understanding, for coding, we need to know. So this is a difference between the coding for hardware and not code. This is one of the examples. I mean, if I was not coding for SDSOC, I wouldn't have bothered to do these things. I would have just used the local buffers only, because it really doesn't matter on software. But because I know that I will be using hardware, so that is why I'm trying to make use of the block RAMs. So yeah, so this is the con function. Now let's quickly look at the dense and the perform max pool also. I'll not spend a lot of time because things already 11:10. So we will, yeah, so the perform dense is just a simple matrix multiplication. So for every output and for every input neuron, you have the weight. This is again the 1D index of the weight. And then since this perform dense and the perform max pool are on software, I'm not bothering to load them onto the on chip or something. I'm just computing them as is the easiest for me. So I just do the matrix multiplication of the input M and the weight, and then I'll add the bias. And okay, if ReLU is 1, that is if I want to perform the ReLU activation, then in that case I will truncate. If the input is greater than 0, then I'll keep the input as same, else I will bring it to 0. That is the ReLU, and then I will write the temporary output to the final output buffer. This is my perform dense. Perform max pool is also the same. I mean, it may be like hard to see how if this is correct or not, but if you think about it in operation level with a bit of patience, then yeah, these loops will make sense to you. Now, for the max pool, again we go through the number of channels, and this is the O into 2 is basically the size of the input. So you, for every row of the input, for every column of the input, for every, and we go with the step size of 2 because it has a stride of 2. So this is the stride. I mean, you can parameterize this also, but since for this network my stride was constant, so I just hard coded it. Then for C equal to 0, C less than 2, C++, then C equal to then for C, for column and rows of the max pooling kernel, then this is the 1D index of the input and 1D index of the output. And then if the input of I index is greater than max, then basically this is taking the max pooling operation. In case you want to do some average pooling, you can just do the logic in this part, then just store the output into this thing. So I'm not spending a lot of time here, but yeah, this is similar to, this is just the operation level logic of the entire layer of both dense and max pool. So these two layers it is good practice to keep the functions you're implementing on software in the same file and to keep the function you're implementing on hardware in the same file. So in our case, since perform dense and perform max pool are on software, I've kept them in the same file called function dev.cpp. But and my conv, since it's a hardware function, I've kept it in a separate file. So now we have discussed the entire code, and I'll just show you the function dev.h also. Yeah, in the function dev.h, we have just basically defined these functions for our main file to use. So perform dense, perform max pool, and perform conv, and these are the max and min values. So I hope up till now everything is clear. Now what we'll do is we'll try to run this. We'll just try to use a GCC compiler, since in the end this is a C++ code, right? So we can compile it and run it with the GCC just to check whether our answers are correct. So let me just go to that documents FDP linet and g++ star.cpp. I build like all my CPP files a -o linet, build them and store them in a file called linet. Okay, I think some comment issue happened. 1 second. I'll just go into the model.h and yeah. Okay. So unsigned layer should be fine. Okay, yeah, I didn't comment this. It is fine. Yeah. Now, okay, so now we have compiled it successfully. Now let us just run it. Yeah, so it is predicting, and frequently there's a mismatch. Our prediction was 97.87 on PyTorch. So we are expecting to get the same prediction here because I downloaded the same weight files, because here you can see I've downloaded the same weight files and the same data and the same label. And in the main, I'm reading those files. So my output should be similar to that of my PyTorch. So currently it is just running. If you have any doubts, you can ask in this time. I will just set up something because of the restart. My setup is all gone. Okay, so now it has run. Right, you can see all the predictions it had, and all the mispredictions also will be there. Like for this example, for 8 it predicted 3. I mean, yeah, and it has the exact same accuracy, 97.87, which should be the case. I mean, if there is any difference, that should be in this 7 part, but in this case there is no difference. But in case you obtain any difference, that could be because of the rounding irregularities between the PyTorch and the and this C++ code. So I hope this testing part is clear, because this testing is very easy. You can easily verify your correctness of your C++ code. You can't verify the synthesizability of that code, but you can verify the correctness. So yeah, I hope till this part everything is clear.
Yeah, one doubt is like this code, right? Till this part, does it have any dependency on the Xilinx tools, or we can use any GCC?
This is using GCC because I've used malloc, right? I will tell you the dependencies when we make the SDSOC project, but this code, this is just the C++, regular C++ code. That is
okay.
Why on the GCC. I don't have any Xilinx tool on this system.
Okay, and how the inferences is happening, this prediction and all? There are some libraries that need to be included, or?
No, this I showed you in the main, right? 1 second. Yeah. in the main, this my output buffer is the final output buffer. I'm reading the output buffer. This will store my predictions. Then from my 10 predictions, from my 10 probabilities of the predictions, I am taking the max value, and that will be my predicted. So you can see here I'm printing this, right? STDC out, this is the index, then predicted is this, expected is this. This is what is printing here.
Okay.
So basically my functions are only running. This perform conv is running, perform max pool is running, perform dense is running, and I'm reading their outputs and finding my prediction. So nothing is using any library. You cannot use any library. Yeah, that is also an important aspect. When you're doing for the tool, you cannot use any library. I think only you can use the standard included libraries like the cout, etc. Because most of these libraries, they use like design methodologies that are not supported in SDSOC. I mean, dynamic memory allocation inside a hardware function is not supported in SDSOC. Recursive functions are not supported. But if in case you use some libraries, these libraries may be implementing these recursive functions or some dynamic memory allocation, and so these won't synthesize. So you have to do everything from scratch. I mean, it helps.
Okay.
It helps to do everything in a parameterized fashion, so that in case you have some other use case, then it can be easily replicated.
Sure.
But yeah,
Thank you.
everything has been written, so nothing of this is coming from any library. Everything has been printed from scratch.
Sure.
So again, the mispredictions, you can see kind of the mispredictions that you have. These are reasonable mispredictions. I mean, 8 can be misinterpreted as 3, right? Because it may happen because of bad handwriting or something, but it can be misrepresented. So yeah, so now that we have basically verified the correctness, now let's get into the SDSOC. So for this, I think there may be some network issue, but yeah, I'm just connecting to the VPN and a lab machine. So I hope this is visible, right? So is this visible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the code is, I have just imported the same code. I have just sent the same code to this machine, but there are some differences. The first difference, let's just get to the main. Let's just get to the main. Now here, when you allocate, this is not the 1 second. Yeah, let me just show you first some things. Yeah, so when you open your SDSOC project, you will see something like this. So you will see an interface like this. So what will happen is you can import all your, so in the source part, so this is the source. In the source, I have these files. These are the files I discussed to you about: conv hardware, function dev, function h, main.cv, main model.h. You can import all those files into this project. You can select your board. So in my case, it is ZC706. You can select a system configuration. This system configuration is the OS, is how you want to run it on the board. You have two options. Either you can use Linux or you can use standalone. So in standalone, your FPG, your program will be in a bare metal, as a bare metal application. In Linux, what will happen is the board will boot a Linux image, and then it will burn your boot.bin and your ELF file, and you can run your program on top of that Linux image. Now you have to define. Now someone asked how to specify what functions to implement on hardware. So this is specified by this hardware function. So in this hardware functions, you can go right here and you can select. So it will give you, it will list all the functions that you have in all of your codes. Yeah, so it has conv, load input, load wait. So I just want to implement perform conv. Where is perform conv? Okay, since perform conv is already selected, it won't be appearing here. But I selected like perform conv as a hardware function. You can see here perform conv is selected as a hardware function. So this function will be implemented on hardware. Then your target, you can either select it emulation or on hardware. If you don't have a board, you can select emulation way, in which it will do your emulation to QEMU, but it will be very slow, and it won't be, the performance will not be symbolizing that of a real hardware performance, but you can verify the correctness. but since we have the hardware available, so selected target as hardware. The build configuration is release. If you do debug, then there's two options, debug and release. If you do debug, then your build will be relatively slower because it adds some more debug traces to your boot. So it will have more debugging capabilities, but if you want to just test out performance, you can build it in a release mode. Then yeah, and then you have selected everything. So this is the basic part of the selection of the SDSOC. Is this clear? Please let me know if it's not. So I'm going a bit faster because of the time, but yeah, please ask any doubts you have.
It is clear.
Okay. Now you also select generate SD card image. This is because you want to burn the images. Okay, I will just show you what goes inside the SD card. If you go to the release and release, insert release, there should be an SD card. So this SD card folder is created by the SDSOC. Here you have the linet.elf, which is the processor side part, and you have the boot.bin, which is the FPGA side part. Then you have the image.ub. This is the Linux image since I use Linux. So this is the Linux image to boot Linux on the board, and this is the some readme. Okay, so this will be the SD card files. This you will be transferring to your board that you have, and then you will be running. It is important that you select the same board that you have, otherwise it won't run. The board won't boot. So you will have to select the same image, and then you will have to send it to the board, and then you can reboot the board once, and then you can run the code. Now I'll just explain some differences between the SDSOC part code and the C++ code that we wrote. So here you can see that I have basically assigned malloc to set SDSalloc. Basically, if you want to allocate memory on the SDSOC, you have to use SDSalloc. I mean, either I could have replaced all these mallocs with SDSalloc, but I just did it at the top. I mean, to make it a bit easier to do so. So basically all the malloc will be replaced by SDSalloc, and all the frees will be replaced by SDSfree. So basically all those mallocs, this will be SDSalloc. Otherwise it won't allocate on the board. When you run on the board, it won't allocate. It will synthesize and it will build, but it won't run on the board. So you have to replace your mallocs with SDSalloc. Other than that, all the processor side code is exactly the same. Then if you go to the function define.h, then yeah, this is the data zero copy. You apply a zero copy to this input, output, weight, and bias. So if you remember that, if you remember the Zinc architecture, what happens is your processor is connected to your DDR controller, and then your processor has to send data to the PL through some data mover, right? The data mover could be either it could be your standard AXI protocol, or you can use some DMA. You can use you can use DMA to transfer your thing, but yeah. So this data zero copy just tells the compiler that okay, this is the data which I want to send from my DDR to my FPGA part. So just send this using some data mover. You can in the detailed pragmas, you can actually specify what type of data mover you want to use to send this type of data, but you have to specify which are the arrays that you want to send and the sizes of those arrays. So in this case, you want to send the input, the output, the weights, and the bias. So yeah, so and you since you're only concerned about the perform conv1 hardware, you only need to specify these for the perform conv. That is one more difference which was not there in the C++ code. Then you have the conv hardware. In the conv hardware, I've added some pragmas. So sir, will I be able to get 10-15 minutes extra, or because otherwise I will not.
Okay, you can.
Yeah.
Try to finish it in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I will. So there are some pragmas which you use, because if let's say you don't have to use any of these pragmas. Any of these pragmas are not mandatory. But if you don't, then in that case, your system won't be parallelized. It will be just running the sequential code on the FPGA, which is basically useless because your FPGA has a much slower clock frequency than your processor. So if you want to run the sequential operations, then you might as well do it on the processor. You don't have to do it on the PL. So there are some pragmas which are used to optimize this entire operation. So first is your array partitioning. So okay, before array partitioning, let me discuss pipelining. Yeah, so this is pipelining you must be aware about. So you just pipeline the loops, and when you pipeline, like since here I'm pipelining the second loop. So when I'm pipelining the second loop, I'm implicitly is telling the compiler to unroll this third loop. So this is, if you read the documentations of the pragmas, so you can find the features of different pragmas. So loop unrolling, you must be aware, it will just convert this loop into a into like, let's say this loop runs 10 times, it will just write 10 lines instead of the loop, and each of those 10 lines can be parallelized. So each of those 10 multiplications, or let's say each of those 10 in case of the convolution, each of those 10 multiplications or 10 dot products, each of those can be computed in parallel. So this pipelining is added here. And then similarly we add loop pipelining to basically like to basically apply a pipelining operation. And then like this pipelining can be added, but one thing to notice is that wherever I'm adding pipelining, I need to make sure that my arrays are capable of handling parallel accesses. Because let's say I have pipelined here, so all of these below loops will be unrolled. Unrolling means that these will be replaced with like 10 of these wait accesses. Now if I want to access these waits in parallel, which I want to, because I want to parallelize the entire operation, I need to make sure that the memories, the block RAM in which the weights are stored, these have sufficient ports so that I can read and write parallelly, right? That makes sense. So I need to partition my array, because if all of my weights and my weight buffer and my bias buffer and my input buffer, all of those weights and biases are stored in a single BRAM, then the single BRAM may have only 2 ports. In that case, I will only be able to read or write 2 weights at the same time, or 2 input values at the same time. But on partitioning that array, I can partitioning means basically it will map them into different programs. So let's say I have 10 values. Instead of mapping the 10 values to one block RAM, which has only 2 ports, I can map those 10 values to 5 block RAMs. So in the end, I get 10 ports, and I can access 10 of those independently. So this partitioning and the dimension of the partitioning needs to be thought of depending on the way you are pipelining. So in this case, I'm pipelining at the second loop. So this third loop will be completely unrolled. So my accesses will be along C0, C0 plus 1, C0 plus 2, C0 plus 3, C0 plus 4. So my parallel accesses will be along the third dimension. In that case, I will partition the third dimension of the array. If you partition like all the dimensions, then it will occupy too much block RAM and it won't be an efficient design. So you need to partition only across that dimension which is necessary according to your parallelization scheme. You can parallelize as much or as low as you want, but it depends on your hardware resources you have. So basically, yeah, these are just basic pragmas. And then you have pragma HLS inline. Inline, what it will do is all of these functions. So if I have mentioned perform conv as a hardware function, that implicitly means that all the functions inside perform conv, all of them are also hardware functions. So this load weights, load inputs, conv, store output, all of them will be implemented on hardware. Now, yeah, so this inline, this basically tells the processor that you can basically just remove the function declaration, and at compile time, you can place all of this code inside this single function. I mean, this allows this, improves the optimization possibilities that the GCC compiler has. And yeah, so these are just some basic pragmas to parallelize. And yeah, so this is what the overall SDSOC looks like. Please ask any doubts if you have. Okay, so if there is no doubt, then okay, maybe I can just show you once. So I'll just reboot this. So this is the FPGA. So since the Linux was booted on the FPGA on the SoC, so I can like this is a ZC706 SoC, and since Linux is booted, so I can use the terminal commands to navigate and run my code. So I'll just reboot it once, and I'll just show you the running thing. So I have built the entire project. So for building, what you can do is just go to right click Linux, then you go build configurations, build project, and you can just click the build project and it will build it for you. And then after building, I've just transferred the build file to this to the SD card on this board. And now I'll just show you, now it's just rebooting. This is the UART. So this is not the Windows machine. This is the UART of the board. So now the board has booted. Now I'll just go to the SD card, which is at /mount. Now in the SD card, there should be a /linet.l. I'll just run this, and you can see this is running. I mean, this is predicting the output, and it will showing it, and it is displaying it on the UART. So yeah, that was the SDSOC part. So I hope if this is clear, then I will close this. So please let me know if there are any doubts. Okay, so
how do we know about the hardware utilization?
Okay, yeah, I can show you how to find that. So in the release, after the build, in the release, you can see, you can go to SDS, this SDS folder, you can get the report, and you can get your conv hardware.report. In the conv hardware, you can see the hardware utilization which was made. So around 65 block RAMs was used, 105 DSPs for 41,000 FF, and this is the LUT. So this is important to know that this is not the exact same hardware utilization. This is the post. I think this is the post synthesis utilization. This is not the post implementation utilization, because yeah. So this is the post synthesis. So this can give you an overall idea about what is the resource profile. But if you need to report these somewhere, or you need to publish this report somewhere, then you should not use this data. For that, you should use the data from the underlying Vivado project. So SDSOC internally creates a Vivado project. So you can find that Vivado project, I mean, by going into, you can go into release, you can go into SDS, go to P0, you can go into VPL, and not in VPL, in Vivado, and in Vivado, you can go into VPL, and in VPL, you can get project. This is the project folder which SDSOC creates. And in the project, you can see this project.xpr file, right? This project.xpr file is the Vivado project that SDSOC has created. And if you open this Vivado project, it will have the implemented all, like if you're familiar with the Vivado project, then it will have all the details related to the power consumption, the exact resource utilization, post implementation, routing, etc. And that will be the most accurate resource utilization. So you should, if you want to publish it, then you should look into the project, exact project, Vivado project. From this post synthesis also. So I hope that is clear. Okay, any other doubt? Okay, if there are no doubts, then I'll just close this and I will disconnect. Time for that. Okay. Now, yeah, is this visible? Is the slides visible?
Yes.
Okay. So now we have done the SDSOC. I hope the SDSOC flow is kind of clear to you about how to deploy a basic CNN on SDSOC. Now, I mean, yeah, these are some, in case you have a larger model, I think some session related tiling was already there. So, I mean, we normally do tiling in case we have a larger model and we cannot fit on the FPGA. Fit as in, it may happen that a block RAMs can't fit the weights and the biases, maybe because the board is small or because your model is big. So in that case, you can apply some optimization methodologies. That is the main and the most popular one is the tiling. And yeah, so these are some resources which you can use to learn more about this. So this is a survey paper on FPGA based neural network accelerators, and this is optimized loop operation data flow. So I mean, there are several optimization in terms of coding techniques. I mean, the code I showed you, that is the most readable one. that may not be the most optimized one. So to have the most optimized one, there is some consideration related to how your loops are arranged. I mean, how your loops are arranged in your convolution and how the data flow is there. And yeah, okay, so that is there. And now this is tiling. So I'm just like, should I discuss the tiling, or was this covered properly in the previous session?
Yeah, it was covered. We can skip now.
Yeah, so this tiling is all skip. I mean, this is just basically you just load the output inputs and weights into tile and just compute the tiled outputs. Basic benefit is that you save the block RAM space. And yeah, so this was model compression. So I think we can stop here, and if there are any doubts, then we can handle them.
Okay, thank you, Rohit, for the great sessions. Both the sessions were quite well managed.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions, any queries from the audience, from the participants? Okay. Yeah.
So there was one more thing that like I attended Vipin sir's session. In that he was talking about DPR, right? For having different layers come into the reconfigurable region at when you need them, layer by layer. So in this case, what is happening is you are not like, it might appear that you are making two different convolution IPs, two different convolution blocks. It might appear that you have two different convolution layers which are implemented on the board, and from one layer I'm going to the next layer, but that is not the case actually. Actually, what is happening is the convolution is according to the worst case scenario. In the convolution, I'm allocating all the memories based on the largest layer, and then while iterating, I'm making sure that I'm iterating only till the time I'm required. So in this case, what is happening is only one convolution IP will be mapped onto the board, and both of them will be using the same IP. Both the
but you can always modify this SDSUC code using the pragma, and you can also make sure that you can map it to the different hardware IPs also.
Yeah, that is possible, but in that case,
it will take more area, but it may not be a good approach in your case, because at a time only one layer is active. That is fine, but in some application where multiple layers are active at a time, so by using the SDSUC pragmas, you can map it to the different IPs in the hardware.
Yes, and also one more benefit of having two IPs is that your two IPs you can apply, like you can pipeline those two IPs.
Yes, exactly.
One
so that's where
can be the second layer.
When you have the streaming inputs coming in, right? Then in that case,
so that is the benefit of.
So in case you are any of the participants are interested, I have already shared the SDSUC tutorial. So it was a 1 semester long course at IIT Delhi, where we covered all the basics about the SDSUC tool, how to use it, what are the pragmas, how to optimize code. So we have covered the matrix multiplication, FIR filtering, FFT, and other things. So you can have a look at that, and you can incorporate in there. So again, thanks a lot, Rohit. As a for any speaker, conducting a one session itself is a challenge, but you have conducted two, and both